So welcome everyone. My name is Emilie Coyle and I am with the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies. And I'm joined today by four phenomenal people who are going to introduce themselves to you. And we're going to have a conversation about this concept of meaningful human contact as it is currently defined in our legislation related to prisons, and specifically in relation to the new structured intervention units, which will turn 1 year old on December the 1st. And what we would like to do is have a conversation with the four of you in your capacity as having much interaction, many interactions with people who are in prison, and talk about what meaningful human contact can mean in the context of our prison system. So I'm just going to go around on my computer, and if you don't mind introducing yourself, Elle, we'll begin with you.
Of course, I'm first. Uh, Hello, everybody. My name is Elle Jones. I'm here in Jabukduk, Halifax, Nova Scotia, the traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people, governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1752. Um, I think even in trying to do the description, we run into kind of human contact words, because I was going to say, well, I work a lot with prisoners, but that word work already implies a kind of power, like as if you're a social worker or, an advocate worker. And the reality is I'm just friends with a lot of people in prison. I love a lot of people in prison, and I share life stories and share being together. And then in that capacity, of course, you work together for liberation. And we don't really have a term for that. And that already shows you that, if I use the word relationship, does that sound sexual? So the naming of what it means to say to be in relation between the outside and the inside, and what that means and calls us to. Obviously, if you love someone who's behind bars, or care for someone who's behind bars, or see the humanity of someone who's behind bars, then obviously that involves doing whatever you can do to either help them get out or alleviate what's going on or prepare something for, when they're going into the community. And that's really what I do and what we do in our network of people. So whether that's, and Adil does this with me, whether that's like trying to stop people's deportations, whether that's trying to help people do a habeas, whether that's fighting to get a lawyer that will defend them, whether that's court support, or whether that's just taking the phone calls and talking to people on the phone and laughing and, wishing people happy birthday, and they're calling and counseling me on my life and, telling me to keep going or whatever. That's really what we do. So I guess that's my introduction.
Thank you. Welcome. And if we go clockwise, Idil, you're next on my computer.
Hi everyone, and also thanks for having me as well. My name is Dil Abdullahi, and similarly, I live alongside people that are incarcerated in ways that I can, um, and so that means similarly to L, whether it is doing more sort of um, formal kinds of work, like things like habeases or filling out forms or looking at assessment forms or reassessing something or completing a form or you know whatever that may be, to yeah, like being able to tell people like scores of cricket in Trinidad, because that's not something they may have access to, is like also super important. Or today I got a call that someone asked me if I did all my groceries and did what I had to do because Toronto is going to get in COVID lockdown, right? So that's what I do. I just try to live alongside folks, and they live alongside me, and we connect, and that's it.
Welcome. Thank you for being part of this conversation. George, you're next.
Sure. My name is George Mayette, and I'm the National Executive Director of the Seven Step Society of Canada, which is a national self-help organization. We have many chapters across the country that are all somewhat autonomous or semi-autonomous, and our primary goal is to prevent recidivism. And we are, or I am, from the target group, if you will. I've been doing time off and on since I was 16 years old. So that's about 51 years ago. I was sentenced as a younger offender, and basically for a couple of years was right off the rails as far as normalcy was concerned. Came from a pretty traumatic, dysfunctional family, traumatic upbringing. But in any event, when I say doing time, I mean not that I was sentenced to a life sentence, but I've been in and out of institutions as a volunteer. I am a volunteer national executive director and part of Seven Step, which is primarily self-help based, and we are more or less focused on recidivists. I mean, we've expanded our reach into all types of dealing with all types of people that have been in conflict with the law. But primarily our goal is to help people get out of prison and stay out of prison. So our main function is working in institutions. And for me personally, one of the more meaningful things I've done, aside from all the volunteer stuff that I've done for many years, is that in the last several years, I've worked with our group in William Head Institution on Victoria, or near Victoria on Vancouver Island. I live on Gabriola Island, which is one of the Gulf Islands, which is on the unceded land of the Salish Nations on the west coast. And particularly, a lot of people have heard of Nanaimo, which is an Anglified version of Snuneymuxw, which is the First Nation whose land we are on right here on Gabriola Island. And but anyway, working in William Head, mostly with lifers, has been a really interesting and worthwhile venture to have experienced people who have been through the system, in some cases inside for many, many years, in anywhere from maximum to minimum institution. So that's just who I am for now. I'll defer to Pete, Emilie, if you will.
Thank you, and so happy to have you in this conversation with us, George. And last but not least, Peter Brown.
All right, my name is Pete Brown. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So I work presently as a case manager with an opiate assisted treatment program in Halifax. That's Direction 180. I deal with people coming out of prisons on a daily basis, pretty much. I do a lot of advocacy work there at my day job, and so it's constant, housing and income assistance, and, health cards and identification, all those types of things. That's what we deal with on a daily basis. And of course, medications, right? It's the biggest part of it. But with the invite here, it would come through Seven Step Society, through George and Emilie, and I've been with Seven Step Society for, I think it's going on 6 years, or no, just past 6 years. And so I've been involved nationally, spent a lot of time with George before COVID. We used to travel together quite a bit, and to Ottawa, and involved with a bunch of things up there, different committees and boards. And here in Nova Scotia, I was one of the ones that helped build it to the point that it's at now, and I was the president for a little while, and then I was executive director for Seven Step Nova Scotia right up till Tuesday past, when I stepped down to hopefully focus a little bit more on the national side of things. Outside of that, I mean, I'm involved with a 12-step program, so I deal with a lot of people coming out of prisons on that level, and I also have lived experience, quite a bit of it. I had probably sentenced to approximately 16 years, did about 12 inside. 4 of that was in a maximum security unit in Atlantic Institution. And I probably been in, I don't know how many segregation units over the years, right from provincial to max. So I've seen the inside a few of those places. And yeah, so that's kind of what I'm bringing to the table here tonight.
Well, welcome and thank you. I think, all of you are going to have a really, a lot of important contributions to this discourse on what is meaningful human contact. And so all of you are aware that the structured intervention units came into place last year on December the 1st. It's now the 1-year anniversary, almost. And they were supposed to replace segregation and solitary in Canada. And so I'm wondering if I can open up the conversation to all of you, and feel free to really just have a conversation to talk about what you've heard from people inside about the structured intervention units, what they look like, has there been a change, and what, you know, and in that, what does this concept of meaningful human contact look like, given that people are supposed to have 2 hours of meaningful human contact when they're in the SIUs, the structured intervention unit? So Peter, do you mind if we start with you, since you were the last one who spoke, and then we can just let the four of you talk?
Sure.
Okay, great.
You know, dealing with people that are coming out today, you know, I haven't heard really much difference, to be honest with you. You know, there hasn't been a whole lot of change that I know of. You know, one of the biggest parts of that, I think, is because of COVID. You know, it's, if anything, prisons have gone into more lockdown since COVID's happened, you know, because I speak to people fairly regular, you know, in different prisons around the country, and, you know, in Quebec and here in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and they're, you know, they've all got the same story, you know, that they've been locked down more because of COVID and separated more. You know, the ranges have been separated, the jobs have been separated, everything has been, you know, more secluded, right? So, and then of course, guys returning to prison after parole violations, you know, with there's a lot more of segregation involved with that now, because, you know, they go into a 14-day lockdown immediately, and then also getting released, they're going into that as well if they're coming from another province. So, you know, I know it's not segregation, you know, but that's really what it is. You know, they're more and more segregating people. And one of the big things I think that have noticed is that when guys are getting out, when people are getting out, not just guys, because they deal with ladies all the time that, you know, are also released. One of the biggest things I think is the shell shock, you know, because of the 14 days prior to getting out, they might have been a little bit more interactive, but then once they, you know, 2 weeks before they get locked down, you know, they get moved to another province. You know, people that have been released from New Brunswick, they get moved down to Spring Hill, and they're locked down there for 14 days before they get released. So, you know, I've noticed a little bit more with people having a hard time to adjust immediately. It's like a little bit of a shell shock when they come out, you know, more than normal, I guess. Plus, then they have to adjust to the outside world, which is completely changed and been turned upside down because of COVID. So it's, yeah, I don't know where else you want me to go with it. I mean, like, I can give you lots of personal experience, but that was prior to this bill. But, you know, from what I see, I haven't seen a lot of difference.
Well, sorry, maybe it might be interesting for people to know, when you say there isn't much of a difference, what did it look like before?
So segregation, I mean, it depends on what prison you're in, you know, what security. It changes, you know, from jail to prison, provincial, federal, they're all run differently. And then it depends on the staff that's also working there. You know, the overall consensus is that you're locked down 23 hours a day. That was, you know, I was shocked to see 22 hours when I first read that, because I don't ever remember being out more than an hour in all the segregation units that I've been in, if you even got out for that hour. You know, like a lot of places, they would keep you locked down for the first 72 hours before they even let you out at all, before you can get a shower or anything. And then, you know, some of them you would be let out like twice a week for a shower, once a week for a phone call, that type of thing. And then, you know, they would keep you locked in 23 hours a day. And I don't know how many times that I heard, you know, a staff member would come around to do their rounds, and they would say, oh, you know, you'd be like, what's going on with rec? You know what I mean? They give them an hour, and they just look at you and go, no, we don't have enough staff. Or somebody called in sick, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I mean, like, that was a regular thing as well. So then it wasn't even 23, it was 24, or, you know, 2 days, right, or 3 days sometimes. So.
And what do the segregation cells look like?
So once again, you know, it's different depending on the prison. You know, the provincials, and I know we're not talking about that, but the provincials were brutal. You know, you would go into the cell, and I mean, I sat in cells that had absolutely nothing in them. You know, the concrete block, steel toilet, and then the the sink, and then it would be like they give you a mattress that's like 2 inches thick, and you'd be dressed up in I used to call them Cookie Monster outfits, like fuzzy gym clothes, and you would sit in there, and you'd be they give you two like blankets that are the same as the ones they use in the hospital, so you know what I mean, lots of holes, like and that would be it, and you were supposed to have the right of a Bible, but if there wasn't enough to go around, then you didn't get one, so you didn't even have anything. So you would sit there, like I said, the first 72 hours, you'd be sitting there 24 hours a day, twiddling your thumbs in your own mind, trying to yell down the hall to people that could hear you or whatever. And, the federals, they were, when I first started doing time, there was no power in the cells. So there were, you would get your own personal clothes after everything had been shipped over and searched. And so it could take a week or two before you even get a change of clothes, depending on, again, staff and whether they liked you or not. That was another issue. So a lot of personalities involved, as it goes through the line, right? It would be in there 23 hours a day. They would let you out, like Spring Hill had a bullpen. Well, they all got bullpens, I guess, but it was just a concrete wall. It was 20 feet high, 15, 20 feet. And then it would be, so you couldn't see anything. And it was just concrete walls. So you would literally walk around in a circle, probably 20 by 20 or something, and you would just walk around in circles. There was no type of recreation whatsoever in the yard. Same as Atlantic Institution. It was a steel cage. It wasn't brick, but it was a steel cage, and they would just let you out there. And again, like, it all depended on the weather. It depended on, so many factors, whether you even got out for that hour. But they, it was 23 hours, man. It was just brutal. They would come to the cell, and they had to flap in the door. So when you would go to use the phone or go to have a shower, you would have to back up to the door and put your hands so that it could cuff you behind your back, and then they would take you where you were going, and then you'd have to put your hands back. And like the showers had cages on them, so you go inside the cage, they'd lock it, put your hands back out. Same with the phones, they would be in cages. So when you come out, you would do the same thing. You would go inside the cage, they'd lock it, and then they'd take the cuffs off you when you're inside the cage.
Sorry, could I just say one thing, just to interject? Sorry, I don't want to steal the rest of your story, but I just want to add something. I think one of the things when Emilie asked about the conditions, and I think for many, many years, and this probably describes it as good as anything, and I was never in solitary, so I can't speak to that specifically. But what I can say is that it was always called the hole. When you were sent to solitary, you were sent to the hole. This is a common term. And that's what they were, in a sense. And as Pete said, provincial, because of the lack of resources, were the worst. They were actually, people would say, oh, provincial jail, that must be okay. That's for, people that aren't serving serious sentences. Well, maybe they're not there for a long time, but they're certainly not there for a good time. And so the conditions, even for a short period of time, could be horrific. And I can relate to a situation where this was back in the 70s. I worked in the system for a while with 7-Step in Alberta. We started an agency and we had an organization. And we had someone who was in our group who had a brother that was doing time in Dorchester. And so she came to us and said, I wonder if there's anything that you guys could do to help her brother. Eddie was his name. He's been in solitary so much and for so long because he has behavioral issues, he has mental health issues, and it's just getting worse and worse. And so it doesn't matter whether that was 45 years ago or 5 days ago. Confinement and isolation, if you have a mental health issue, especially if you're somewhat schizophrenic or whatever the situation might be, then that just, as everybody knows, exacerbates the situation. So anyway, here was this guy being held mostly in segregation solitary, who was coming up for statutory release, and he had nowhere to go. But he was being released, and his sister was trying to arrange for him to be able to come out to Calgary, where I was living and involved with 7-Step at that time. And So he had stat release with a condition of supervision. And so we actually arranged that we would have the supervision contract through 7-Step. In those days, I mean, those don't exist much anymore for voluntary organizations, but we actually were able to, even though we were in the role of keeper, which wasn't a role we relished having been inside ourselves, but at least we knew that we could treat this person humanely with some love and understanding to try and make their journey that much easier for them when they came out. Anyway, so this person came out, and guaranteed, here was someone that should have been in some sort of situation with some mental health support and treatment long before he was ever released. And I'm not sure that circumstance has changed significantly these days, especially if somebody's in a maximum security institution. But anyway, sorry, Pete, I jumped in there, but I just wanted to throw that little call it addendum, if you will, to what you were saying.
That's great, George. I think that's important that we understand that. And you mentioned love and care, and Elle and Adil also mentioned love and care. So maybe I'll bring the conversation to either Elle or Adil and to say, what are you hearing from people about the structured intervention units, and have they had any opportunity for meaningful human contact, and whatever that means? Oh, Elle, you're on mute. If you...
Of course. I'm really glad that Pete brought up that we can't just sort of even say like, this is segregation, this is segregation, this is not. And that's been the real problem all along, right? That's why it took us so long to even fight in that small way the idea of segregation, because we've always been arguing the technicalities. And we know that all over lockdown has been getting more and more over the years. So we've been seeing normal become 4 hours out of your cell. That's good. They consider that like totally great, 2 hours out of your cell, great. So we've seen this all changing and changing and changing. And this is like before this is before COVID. Over the years, we've just been seeing that become really the new normal across Canada. Massive lockdowns all the time, where they're just going into 2 weeks of lockdown, coming out for a few days, going back into 2 weeks of lockdown, coming out for a week. So like all over, we're seeing confinement really being pushed to these extremes, and none of that's even being considered a segregation situation or a solitary situation. It's just the security of the jail. So I think we really need to understand that. So I'm really glad that Pete brought that up, that like COVID means they're going in for 3 days, getting tested, sitting here for 3 days by themselves, then going on to a 14-day COVID range before they're even going on to major ranges. And that's everybody who's being transferred, everybody who's coming in. As far as the SIUs, everybody's saying they're worse. I know some people that are on the inmate committees, heading up inmate committees, so do those walkthroughs. And they're saying that there's no review because it's not solitary. So you don't have to have your 24-hour review, your 5-day review, your 10-day review, your 15-day review. You're just there. So they're there until they want to take you out because it's a behavioral issue. And so what they're telling you is, we'll let you out when you change your behavior. And what does that mean? We saw that with women that caused mass amounts of, we know the harm and suicide that caused to women. Remember case management protocol that they used to do with the woman? And Ashley Smith was on that. And it was incredibly damaging because you would just say, when we see it, we'll know it. So, people were being told, you don't get a washcloth until you behave. You don't get tampons till you behave. And then you rolled your eyes at a guard and that wasn't behaving and you went right back, right? And we're seeing that now being installed in the men as well. So people are saying, well, like, what do you want me to do? One guy said to me yesterday, he was saying like, how do you think you're going to change behavior? Like if I'm here for behavior and then you don't have any mental health and you don't have any intervention, no one's helping me change my behavior. Like, why am I going to change my behavior? Like, what's going to change my behavior? Just locking me up more? He also said, I don't care if the 2 hours out a day are in Disneyland. Like it's the other 22 hours a day that matters. Like what's happening to me there, So what we're hearing is it's very arbitrary. It's like random how you go in and out. There's no rules around it. People don't know how it's governed. And so that is all making it worse. And of course, we know when things are arbitrary and subjective, we know who always ends up in those units. Indigenous people, Black people, people with mental health problems, people with disabilities, the so-called problem people, that's who ends up targeted. And we've known for years, like in the women's institutions, any max you go into, it's like half Indigenous women who are there for like self-harm, so these are the kind of things we're seeing. So in the women's situation, they just don't call it seg at all. They're like, it's unit B. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, so we see this idea of just like renaming something and claiming it's something different. If you call it a COVID range, it's not lockdown. If you call it Unit B, it's not solitary. If you call it SIU, it's not segregation. And then you can do whatever you want. And we're seeing, guys, just as the last thing on sort of the technicalities, there's been a ton of habeas here lately where people have been really challenging the behavioral ranges provincially. And the judges just don't understand what's happening, right? So the guys are red flagging this and saying, you know, I'm on this range, I can't get off. They told me it's 30 days before I can get assessed, and then 30 more days before, and the judges are saying, well, you know, as long as it's a behavior issue and it's a last resort, then we're okay with it, and not understanding what's actually going on. And that's this huge problem, right? That people are speaking out and saying how dangerous this is, how they understand this as lockdown. Instead of listening to what prisoners are understanding as a lockdown situation, they're going off, you know, they write the jail and they say, is this lockdown? And the jail says, oh no, it's a behavioral change range. And they say, okay, well, I heard from the superintendent, and the superintendent said it wasn't lockdown, so I'm throwing this out. And I'm like, the people who are living in lockdown are the ones that need to tell you it's lockdown. And contrary to popular belief, people think that, well, nobody in prison takes responsibility. You know, nobody in prison will say their condition. That's not true. People in prison will say to you, yeah, I know I got in a fight in the cell and I shouldn't have done it. Yeah, I know that I was doing this. I know that I was in a bad place. Like, they're not saying they're not doing things. It's a lie that everybody just says they're innocent and nobody, you know, would ever agree to be in any situation. They understand. And if they're put on a level and they think they deserve it, they will say like, yeah, you know, I did the thing, like I did my 5 days, whatever. So when they're telling you like, this is really unfair, this is really wrong, this is arbitrary, I'm not being judged properly, I'm not giving a right, that's true. That's not just something they're saying to say it. People don't fill out these habeases and go to court and like get on the blacklist or whatever we want to call it of the institution for fun, right? If this is, when we see this happening, we know it's the truth. So it's also connected to this idea of how we see people in prison as always being liars, as always being criminal, as never to be believed. And then everything they say eventually is proven, but it's like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, then we agree with what they say. So I think we also have to really think about that, right? We really need to hear the testimony of people inside. And when they're telling us a situation is bad, if a guy in the max is telling you a situation is bad, a situation is bad. That guy's just not calling you up to whine at you. He's telling you something that's real. I'll let Adil talk, and then, I did want to also then talk about this idea of contact and humanity and kindness, and that's just connected to the last things I was saying, right? That how can there be contact or humanity if you don't see people as human? If you think that the solution to people being in pain or trauma is to lock them up in a literal cage, then, you know, that starting place is not assuming that people are human or have any ability to transform or to change their lives or to, be someone that deserves love or someone who deserves care or someone who deserves treatment. And we see that in our constant idea that we need to just discipline and control and beat people down instead of saying, you know, we can actually work with people, we can help them, asking them what they need, asking them what would help. And that ties into what we'll get into later, but I'll let Adil talk.
I can jump in just for a second.
Go ahead.
I was just going to kind of add to what you're saying about, I spent a lot of time in there and I've seen a lot of guys get put in segregation for what they call good order of the institution. And they're not actually doing time in the hole. They're not, you know what I mean? They're not in segregation. They haven't been sentenced to anything. They're not even charged with anything. They're put in there because they may have a problem with another prisoner, or they might have, self-harm or something along those lines. And they'll put them in there indefinitely. I've seen guys in there for years under that heading. Good order of the institution, they call it. And, I had some good friends that, literally, one guy I know, I grew up with him, and he spent 3 years in all because of good order of the institution, right? So anyway, I'll stop there.
Can folks hear me? Is that good?
Yeah, good.
I can just like listen to all of you talk for forever because I think the entire conversation is so interconnected in so many ways and like is bringing forward, I think, a number of really important things. And, Pete, where you began with talking about the fact that there hasn't actually been much change, right? Talking about the impacts of COVID, and George really thinking through the fact that there's ways that disability is compounded in that, and Elle really thinking about the ways that, containment is used sort of within containment, which is so strange, right? And so for me, like I just took a few notes, mainly from what other people said, because everyone is so brilliant. So I guess maybe I'll talk about the few things I thought about. So first and foremost, I think it's important to say for me, and certainly like with the podcast Elle and I work on, that we don't believe in prisons, period. And so not believing in prisons, period, obviously means then we don't believe in solitary confinement as a, I'm saying we, like I'm speaking for you. So nod or like unmute for a second.
Yes, we are abolitionists, and we do not agree with prison or with renaming and reciting the prison and claiming it's not a prison.
Absolutely. And so if fundamentally sort of containment from the perspective of prisons doesn't work, then absolutely segregation or structured segregation and or behavioral units, containment units, healthcare units in all these ways aren't going to work, right? And so I think first and foremost, we know that segregation not only, Pete, like you were just talking about, is deployed for a number of reasons, right? Including and not also limited to like the confusion around security classifications and like having incompatibles and the way that that is also used in that context. The way that is deployed against people that have particular types of charges within the institution. We know that sort of there's a discourse in the prison around people that are in PC and sort of what that kind of means. And so also then thinking about the ways even within the prison system, we create further containments that at times don't have much to do with anything other than a perceived culture within the prison that we also then don't take seriously as the public, right? So there's a lot of ways that we don't really believe, you know, even though a lot of the folks I talk to say that it's not like it was in the old school anymore, right? Like people don't have the same values and principles and sort of even like care and social responsibility in institutions in the way that they did even 10 or 15 years ago, right? And that's not surprising for me, because if we think about what's happening in the broader social world, the increase of individualism and neoliberalism, like breakdowns of kind of collective cultures more that are like, you know, where we've jettisoned the idea of even a collective struggle. So in the broader world, so of course that's going to happen in the prison, right? And so as we think about all the ways that prison logics are also dividing inmates in and of themselves, I think that's an important thing. But I also want to step back from that a bit to talk a bit about fundamentally these institutions are not meant to create spaces of interaction. And so that's like, you know, that's not the purpose of what's supposed to happen, right? So if we think about even from the guards, and I say this having taught in a college where I taught in correctional programs, right? Not by choice. I was starving and hungry and needed a paycheck, right? And you know, in sort of thinking about these things, I think about like, what is the curriculum for people who are in college learning to become guards, right? Engagement isn't something that's important. The curriculum and the teaching and the way that we ask guards to do their job is to observe and to surveil, period, right? So people who already aren't being taught to have the basic kinds of ideas around engagement and intervention, I don't care what interaction you have with somebody within a system that we already know doesn't work. We haven't trained you to interact with people anyway. We've trained you to guard people, to monitor people, to watch people. So quite frankly, I want to invite people to also think about the quality of interactions that people have within institutions, right? So I don't care if you talk to a guard or not. What is the quality of that interaction? What is the quality and the nature of that exchange, right? What does that look like in the context of not barking orders at people, or not only interacting with people to count them and to tally them and to discipline them, right? And so I think that we have to begin to also understand that the people who are outside of the folks that are in community and folks that are trying to support from the outside, that the people who are creating these interactions are the people who are incarcerated themselves, first and foremost, right? And so I think, you know, I'm not going to ask a heart surgeon, you know, to give me surgery for like a broken leg, right? And so what is our expectation of the people who are working in these systems when we literally let them sit on their ass for 11 of 12 hours, less when they're walking around and doing their checks? What is our expectation? I don't want to talk to those people, and I certainly don't want them talking to the people that I care about and love anyway, because those interactions are mitigated through certain kinds of ways of interacting with people, right? So it's not just that I'm I'm interested in how much time people are getting to interact and have meaningful interaction. It is, what is the quality of that interaction? What is the meaning of that interaction? What are the accountabilities around those interactions? And what are the relationships in those interactions as well? And just to go back to what Pete was saying, I think that in this moment of COVID, what has really been made clear for those of us who work with folks is, guys are calling this the journey. When people go see their family, they call it the journey, right? They call it a kind of public health journey. So it takes 3 weeks when you go off of a unit until you may come back on that particular unit. And in that time, in an effort to go see your family, you're going through segregation again for that 14 days. Right? Mind you, every day guards are coming in and out of these institutions, often not wearing the appropriate PPE, often bringing in illness into these institutions, particularly COVID. And right now, we understand that, I can only speak from Ontario. In Ontario, people are using bed sheets made by Corcan as their PPE. And the guards are the ones who have the N9 masks. We're then also not tallying or thinking about or even calculating who's actually getting COVID on the inside or thinking about that, right? And I know we'll talk about this later, but when people do have these interactions, I think about like the horrible technological systems within CSC, that even when you do get that video visit, that you can't hear the person, and that it's freezing all the time, and that you have 30 minutes and that you can barely hear the person, and that if the guard is late or in a bad mood, that they don't care, and that time isn't given back to you anyway, and that you have to fight to get that one visit anyway, right? Like I have to send my email every Monday. It has to come at 6:59 a.m. It can't come at 7 or 7:02 or 7:03, right? And then I have no choice around the time I get scheduled for a visit, right? So I have to be available. You can tell me it's on a Thursday, it's on a Friday, it's on a Tuesday, it could be at 10, it could be at 1, and you have to make yourself available. And because you get a visit doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a meaningful visit, right? Like CSC still operating in the technology of 1979 in 2020 with all of the large budgets that it has, right? And these are also, I think, again, things that we have to think about. So that's also what I think about in the context of quality of interaction, right? So I can get the visit, but if it doesn't work, if I have to go through hell to get the visit, if you don't want to give me the visit, if you harass my people coming to get the visit, and then finally you get there and the operating system doesn't work, you don't care about whether or not that person interacts with me, right? And quite frankly, many of us are keeping folks healthy, happy, and well in there, right? And if they're healthy, happy, and well, and they're incarcerated, does that not change the condition for the guards? Can that also not be a reciprocal kind of process around really thinking about what this is in that process? I don't know.
Sorry, Adele, I just wanted to comment back on that. And you made such a great point of outlining that whole, I don't know how to call it, but the mindset of how the institutions are structured and operate. So that being the case, how could you possibly, or anyone possibly think that an SIU is going to have any kind of opportunity for meaningful intervention or contact? Because if the whole premise is this is punishment, this is deprivation, this is security, then the next step is an institution within an institution. It really comes back to the whole idea that and this is a larger philosophical question, of course, that needs to be answered and addressed, which probably isn't going to happen really quickly. I mean, it's going to take time, and there's a lot of us have been working at this for many, many years. And in some ways, and I was thinking as you were talking, it took me back. You talked about the old school or the old days, and there was a system, there was a sort of a, I don't know how to describe it, of an environment of almost respect, that even though there were keepers and there were prisoners, there was this sort of mutual respect. And I know because I spent a lot of time with the founder of Seven Step in Alberta. He's 91 years old now. He did time in the 40s and 50s in maximum security institutions. And, I spent a lot of time with him when we were setting up the organization in Alberta. So I learned from the old school. In fact, a lot of people within Seven Step roll their eyes when I talk about some of the old one-liners that come back from the old days of the old rounders and that sort of thing. But interesting enough, the structure, as ugly and as terrible as it was, there was almost a better environment within the institutions because there was this sense of respect. But when you take that forward and you have, as you said, society's norms have changed significantly, and where there, and I've heard this a lot, because one of the prerequisites for a 7-step member to join our core groups, our core, sort of 7-step membership groups, is they have to be solid. Well, what does solid mean? And, so if you talk to some of our members in some institutions, they say, well, there's hardly any more solid people in here anyway, but that's a different story. But that's happened in society generally, about mutual respect of people to other human beings. So, that's one of the handicaps, I think, that we're dealing with today, and you've outlined it beautifully in terms of what exists in a prison to begin with, and then to have staff who aren't allowed, because a lot of them, I think, given the opportunity, can have compassion. They do have compassion, but it's almost like it's almost trained out of them, and because then that makes them less efficient to manage the security of the institution. So that makes it more difficult, for the kind of contact that people might want to have. So I think that just, lends itself to this whole notion of, aside from which, personally, as much as I would like to see all prisons disappear, honestly, I don't think that's going to happen in the near term. I think they're going to be here. We're going to have to make the best of how we manage within them. But I do think those resources that can come from the outside, and just coming back to this whole question of meaningful human contact, whether it's in the form of the personal visits, which is one thing, or if you have, whether it be compatible, other compatible prisoners, or community organizations who can have people come in that have some capacity to interact with people that are in those isolated situations. COVID is another story, of course. Now we're talking about, trying to manage the virus. Doesn't matter who you are, you can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you are carrying the COVID virus, you're not going to do anybody any good by having any kind of direct contact. Doesn't mean you can't talk through glass. I had to go visit my sister, who recently passed away, but she was in a nursing home with advanced Parkinson's, and this was back in August, because her time was short. So I had a glass visit with her. I mean, I actually could have had a personal visit, but the problem was that I was going to be traveling through 2 airports to get to, she lived up in a small town in Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan. So we arranged with my brother-in-law that I would come to the outside of the window. Luckily, she was on the ground floor of this nursing home, so he could wheel her around in her wheelchair and she could see me. And it was one of these awning windows that opened up like this. So I could stay on the other side of the glass. She could hear me because there was openings on this side. So I could actually have a visit with her through the glass. And that was still meaningful. And the sad part was she couldn't communicate because she lost her ability to speak, but we had eye contact. So that is a way, there's something there. Whether that helped her in her final time or not, I can't say. I hope it did help me at the very least. So somebody benefited, and I hope she did. I think it made my brother-in-law feel better because he felt there was somebody else in family that was there. So, that's just a situation and nothing to do with prison, but not that far removed from a situation that you could have in, in prison, where you were still able to have some kind of communication, even if it was through glass. What's going to happen? Really, when you think about it, only good can come of that. What bad can come of that? Anyway, so I'll stop there, because I know Elle looks like she's got something.
No, because you guys have me all, and I want to hear from Pete as well, and I want to hear back from George, and I want to hear back from Adil, because you're making everybody think. As far as the correctional thing, I wanted to say that my partner was filming, the Maritime Business College does they were having their graduation, and part of that is correctional guards. And what they showed in the slideshow was the mock takedown they do in the cell. So that's what you're showing as the greatest moment as you're graduating. So what does that tell you about what you think a guard does? And when you're trying to encourage people to come to guard school, what are you enticing them with? These images of violence, right? you get to go and bust into this cell and beat the hell out of people, right? So right away, that sets the kind of idea that Adil was talking about. I was looking yesterday, and this goes to what George was saying, and Adil was also saying about visits, and particularly around the glass. So first of all, I think about how many women just don't have their kids visit them because they're like, I don't want my child to do this. So I love my child so much that my love is that my child will not see me. So my love is to get rid of that contact, because I don't want my child growing up and saying I had to go visit my mom and like stand behind glass, right? So many people refuse contact out of love. And I think we really also, have to remember that, right? I was looking through the tenders the other day, like our provincial tenders on, like the contracts they have with justice. And because what I was looking up is the phone system, which we can never find the contracts for, because people were telling me about what they have to sign to use the tablets. And the terms of use to use the tablets include giving their biometric data to police forces all over the world and correctional facilities forever, and also that of their families. So our credit cards, which we have to use to like sign in to get the phone packages, our facial recognition, our IDs, our license numbers, all of that we have to put in the system to get visits is being sold or given out to law enforcement to build like the facial recognition database or the biometric database and the location database. And like on their end, of course, to even use the tablets, it's facial recognition, right? Like they're logging in through biometric data, and to do that, they have to give that up. So they're like, I'm on remand, I'm innocent, I could get out with having been acquitted, and all of my information is with these law enforcement agencies now. My mom's credit card and my mom's license. And so like, that's very abusive. And that's the thing I wanted to tie to. Like, let's remember that prisons have abusive contact. Prisons strip search people, which is legalized sexual assault. When you go to get your methadone in a prison, they strip you and make you like sit there for an hour. They check inside your mouth, your medication. Like, intimacy in a prison is never a good thing. It's not like, oh, all the hugs you get, like, you're being strip searched, you're being beaten down, you're being strapped down, you're being like having, everything checked out, you're being cavity searched. Like, these are the things that contact is in a prison, and it's surveillance. It's coming in to visit. And, if you're coming for a personal visit, they're looking through a woman's like birth control pills, and like if she has to bring lube and whatever medication you have, like that is out there, and they search that like really publicly, and everybody knows that kind of information, right? So like that very idea of being intimate and close in a prison, like that's not a good thing, right? So when you're abusing something like a strip search, when you're abusing the ways that people are just rushed and hands put on them and pushed down and held down, then how do you turn around and talk about contact? When I was looking at the tenders, what I was saying, sorry, I got distracted with the surveillance thing, but they had the list, and it's like body bags, medical examiner, death identification. So like, what does it mean to be in a justice department and put out tenders for body bags for your prison system, for your jail system, knowing that means that you expect people to die, and you don't think about, should anybody die in a prison? Should anybody die there? Like, shouldn't they be taken to hospital? Shouldn't they be allowed to go home? Like, what does it mean to be like, yeah, we probably need some body bags. Yeah, we probably need some inspection units. So it's all like scanning, inspection, surveillance, and death. And that's just like out on the website. And you think like, what does that mean to have an institution where you know that? And like, literally, like, we better be prepared for this death. But at the same time, then say that this is a place that can be kind. This is a place where there's meaningful human contact. You'll get the help there you need, as if you go there and get all this like wonderful addictions treatment and, like wonderful job counseling, which isn't happening, right? Like, people are asking for it and saying, we want these things, and it's not happening. That's not what they're spending the money on. They're spending it on scanners so they can look inside your body. And that's what contact is right now. X-rays going into your body to like see what you have in your body cavities. They're spending it on pepper balls and more weapons. They're spending it on rejigging the jail because they want to have more direct supervision, right? So they've moved to like direct supervision units. So they're spending it on that, and the guards don't like that. So they get more weapons in response. So they're spending it on like better vests. And, so I think we really have to think about what is a prison. A prison is it's not housing. It's not therapy. It's not a place you go to get help. It's not a place where, we can fix your life. Oh, we can deal with your trauma. If that happens, it happens incidentally, and it could have happened in community. So yes, sometimes there is a really good counselor in the prison that helps people understand their trauma. That's not because of the prison. That person could be doing that in supported housing. That person could be doing that on the streets. That person any of the stuff that happens when we're like, you know, this is the thing that made me turn my life around because this person came to visit me in prison, that could have happened outside of prison. So we can't pretend that the prison makes that happen. The prison let something happen that would happen better and quicker and like with more love in community, right? So I just really want to think about that this is a fundamentally abusive institution that, you know, requires people to, it looks at you when you're taking, you know, and you're in the bathroom. It looks at you when you're sleeping. If you want to have any kind of sexual contact, that's going to be policed. If your family wants to come in, they're going to decide what family is. I had an interaction with an institution where they called me and like wanted to play 20 questions with me around who would be on the other end of the phone, you know? And I'm like, I don't know. It could be a lot of people. And that immediately made them suspicious. And then just the fact that I know people in prison meant that I was guilty and suspicious. What kind of person knows all these guys in prison that she wouldn't know exactly who we're asking about? And that immediately means I'm probably bringing contraband, or I'm probably a sex worker, or I'm probably doing something. So it spreads outwards, right? That what starts in the prison, and we've talked about containment between containment, then it spreads to your family. What kind of family raises somebody who goes to prison? What's wrong with their mom? What kind of community has so many people that go to prison? They must be criminal. It's the music they listen to. Well, you know how rednecks are, you know how white trash is, like, you know, all of these different things. And it's always, always, always spreading outwards. And then eventually it comes to all of us in different ways, right? Today, it's facial recognition technology on the tablet in the prison. Tomorrow, that's in the university. The next day, that's at your work, you know? So as Adil said, right, this is a social idea as well. And so the prison is about social control. It's about disciplining people. It's not about helping people. And when you then turn around and say, oh, no, contact is meaningful, as you do everything you can to survey families, everything you can to shame families, everything you can to stigmatize people, abuse them, harass them, and then say that, you know, anything meaningful can come from that. I think we have to continue to challenge that. And that's, you know, why people are abolitionists. It's not, sometimes like when you're seen as an abolitionist, it's like naive. Like people think if you really knew it, you know, you wouldn't think that if you really knew. And it's because people know. It's because for years people were reformists and said, you know, why don't we just do this? You know, the Creating Choices report, this report, that report. People over and over again said, why don't we try to change? Why don't we try to change? And now people are like, I don't think we're going to change. Like, I don't think that can happen. I think every time you try to change, all you do is make it worse and just pretend it's better. So maybe we should stop doing it. And that's exactly where abolition comes from for most people. It's not from a place of not knowing. It's that after years of hearing over and over and over and over again, these kind of horrors, at some point you say, should we just allow that to happen? And I also want to hear from Pete now. So I'm going to Pete and George again, and Adil.
Thanks, Al. You know what you guys were sharing there, I was thinking about, you know, my own personal experience with, you know, the institutions, with the segregation, with the transfers, with releases. And one of the things that keeps coming to my mind, and not only that, but dealing with people on a regular daily basis that are getting released or going in, and then I was, you know, before COVID happened, you know, I never heard of this before, but myself and a good friend and 7-Step member, Steve DeVoe, we had actually gone inside the provincial prison here and started facilitating a pre-release program. And both of us at that time had active records. And it was like a pilot project. And they were, you know, the supervisor here in Nova Scotia is, you know, is a good friend of ours. He's actually really involved with 7-Step and trying to open the doors for more of that type of thing. He actually gets us to speak to, you know, new correctional officers. When they hire them, they like to go in and we'll tell our stories and take questions and stuff from the lived experience. But one of the big things that I kept coming back to was, you know, when I first started sharing in the beginning, was I was talking about the shell shock, right? And this happens over and over and over, right from the point of sentencing, or right from the point of arrest, because every single step of the way is a different environment. Every single step of the way, you have to find these new coping mechanisms to survive. And then when you finally get to that point where you're in survival mode and you're able to adapt to the segregation units, to the segregation from the community, then they let you out. And each one of these steps create its own mental health issues, you know, because you have to live by a code, right? What they call the code. Then you also had to live by the rules that are forced upon you on the institutions and you know, the people that work within the institutions. And like I said earlier as well, those rules are subject to personalities, right? And you know, the people that are enforcing these rules are also very well protected. So depending on how their personality is running that day, that's how you get treated in segregation units. That's how you get treated no matter where you're at. But the segregation units really have a profound effect because that's your only interaction, right? So is with staff. You know, we talked about, George and I and some other 7-Step members have been really focused on the peer side of things, right? Because, you know, with the peer support, that's huge, meaningful interaction because it allows both people to grow. You know, the person that is being the peer support is growing, they're building their confidence in being pro-social and helping other people be pro-social. And then the person that's there, you know, that's getting the help is learning from a person that's already been there. So, you know, that's why I'm so involved with all these programs that I do, is because it's all about giving back. And that gives me a direction in life. That gives me purpose in life. You know, and so that's really what it's about. So, you know, me and George were talking about it the other day. And, you know, we had said, like, you know, that's right. We're actually right, you know, we're further than the middle. We're almost finished creating a peer support training program within 7-Step Society. So we're on the cusp of it. I actually got part of it today that I was reading over, that where we're at with it and the structure of it. And it's almost ready to send off to George there to have a look. But you know, we've been working with NSCC, Nova Scotia Community College. We were working with corrections here in Nova Scotia, and nationally, you know, with National 7-Step, and we've all been putting this together. And it's coming from peer support perspective. So, you know, and then on top of that, you know, so many, you know, the information has come from so many other places to do with supports and peer supports. So we've been putting this together. But when we were talking about it the other day, George and I, we were talking about how what an amazing way to create the meaningful human contact than to train people that are already inside the institutions and allow them to do the contact. Not only is it going to be this huge way of giving back and allowing other people to learn, but also the cost, right? I mean, you just put them on the payroll for their $5 a day, you know, and that's their job, peer support, right? You know, it would have to take a big, you know, turn in the way that they're dealing with things and believing with things, because, you know, the first thing comes to their mind is they're going to be moving contraband around, you know, which is huge. But, you know, you can't, you know, it's like I tell everybody all the time, you know, like, you know, I got caught doing robberies here in Dartmouth with a gun, but that doesn't mean that all of Dartmouth got locked down and nobody was ever allowed another gun. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't, but that's the way the prisons come at it. That's the perspective that they come at it. You know, well, this guy did that, so nobody gets it. You know, and that's, but yet, mind you, that guy was punished repeatedly, probably for the offense. You know, he went to segregation, like myself. You know, I went to segregation, I did this, and, you know, and then got shipped off to a higher security and did time in segregation. So, but yet the whole institution also got punished for it, for the exact same thing that I would have done, right? Which creates a whole nother sort of issues. But anyway, I don't know. That's where I was feeling with it, with you guys sharing and stuff, and it gets the wheels rolling. The little hamster's just going crazy up there. So.
I would just wanted to quickly add, Pete, like, I'm a big proponent of like peer models, particularly in the context of mental health, like, and forensic mental health, which is like the sort of more formal work that I do. And one of the things that I both love and worry about in the context of peer work is that in many ways, and I'm only speaking from this from the context that I know it, which is in the context of mental health practice, what ends up happening is peer workers end up reproducing what's happening in the generalized labor market, right? So even though we may train everybody in the prison, even though we may offer the RAP training or the recovery training or the peer training to everybody, the people who then get to carry out the work of the peer work in many institutions end up being the people who, for example, aren't the people who are doing life, aren't the people who maybe have, like, let's say, for example, killed a police officer or killed a guard, right? There are ways that peer work has its own hierarchy, right? And then the better kinds of peer jobs also then replicate the labor market again, like I said, right? So in mental health, for example, a lot of the really good paying permanent peer jobs are often given to white people, right? And white people who don't, let's say, for example, have like a diagnosis that's a psychotic disorder, or a white person who may have a mental health issue, but maybe has never had involvement with the criminal justice system, right? So we end up creating all these layers of like, who is the sort of best person amongst the people who we don't want to have anything to do with, right? And then we end up reproducing that even in our nicest and our kindest hope to want to do something differently, because the systems still have their own hierarchy. And even in the work that we want to do, there's still a particular hierarchy, right? So what happens when, like, in the context of mental health, when the peer worker is the person who doesn't want to take their medication, right? The person who's still disruptive in the organization, but is still lucid in particular kinds of ways. What happens if the peer worker is the person who's still, actively using, for example, but has a really great analysis around like policy work in the prison, for example, right? What happens if, the person is a lifer who has like multiple kinds of horrible things on their record while being in there, right? Even though those of us who are even from the community may be like, all of these people are folks that we want to engage and we want to support, the institution still has the ability to mitigate who gets the opportunity to do that in many regards, right? And I also think it's important for us to remember that in many cases, the very work that people who are incarcerated do is more work than the guards do and don't get paid anywhere near that. So now when you're doing your, $5, hour job, but you're also working in the kitchen, or you're also working in the canteen, but you're doing this thing for community, which in many cases, at least in Ontario, I know that if you do things that are volunteer related, you don't get to use them for your parole, right? As a way of also then wanting to make sure that you are a good and genuine citizen, right? That you're not trying to use this for a kind of purpose. So I think about that often in that context, but then I also just think about the ways that, we make space in the world for people who want to, quote, be better in ways that are acceptable to the rest of us, right? So what happens for the people who, no matter what they do, life can't provide a different opportunity once they're out, right? And so what does meaningful contact mean for that person, right? What does meaningful contact mean, for example, for like women who are incarcerated, that we know the partners don't stick around, right? Anytime I've gone to a woman's visiting room, there's not as many people as there is in a men's visiting room. We all know that, right? In the men's visiting room, not only are there more people, and I hate to use this kind of binary language, but I use the binary language because CSC uses the binary language, right? And because there is no kind of other way to imagine otherwise in this context, right? So for me, when I'm speaking about women, I am speaking about trans women. When I'm speaking about men, I am speaking about trans men, even though I'm not making that explicit, but that is the intent of my thinking. But, when I go here in Ontario, the waiting rooms are full. They're not only full with women, but they're full with like really well-dressed women with lots of change in their pockets for snacks, right? And then when I often go to, especially women's federal settings, you often will see a mother. You maybe will see a grandmother. You may at times see a child, but often not so much, because what also happens is, as we know, children don't get to be, especially when they're underage, they don't get to make a choice around the communication or seeing you in the way that adults do. So if you have a relationship breakdown in the context of many women, or if your child is in, child welfare, that's not even an opportunity that's provided, right? And so, yeah, like I think about that, or even just like really basic things that are not maybe as sort of important in that way. I'm trying to find a TV for somebody right now, and they can only have a 9-inch TV, 19-inch, sorry, TV. Well, 99% of companies no longer make a 19-inch TV, flat screen. But
Those
see,
are going for like thousands of dollars on like Kijiji now.
well,
because-
exactly,
yeah,
right?
like,
So even when we talk about like meaningful contact, cable still costs money in prison, which many people forget, right? So even if you don't have your family contact, so forth, but if you can't find someone to send you your pen pack, right, that may have that TV in it, that may have a book in it, that may have that Bible in it that you wouldn't get otherwise, that may have that Quran in it that you wouldn't get otherwise, right? Or if you find a person from the community who's willing to do that for you, but again, CSC is so technologically behind that there are things that, you know, for me, you know, a lot of people see TV as meaningful interaction, right? And so there are just, I feel like, a whole host of things that the structure does not consider. Or even something, you know, conversations again that I have with certain people is wanting to do things that will make you get restrained, because getting restrained means you get touch in ways that you otherwise don't get. And many of us don't have to think about that, right? We don't have to think about what it means that if you quote unquote act out, that then means at minimum, you'll have a kind of physical contact that you wouldn't have otherwise.
One thing I would say, Adele, is that under the current COVID conditions and restrictions, that maybe society is being taught a lesson about what the lack of human contact really means. And maybe our mission will become a little bit easier when we work our way, hopefully, out of COVID, to reach people who have been isolated, who have been deprived, who, you know, haven't had any meaningful contact, you know, like hugs and that sort of thing. So maybe that's one of the, you know, I have some very religious relatives who post on Facebook regularly and about God teaching us a lesson. And who knows, maybe they're right. I'm not sure. But you know, one of the things that may be a benefit, because realistically, the only way that we're going to see a major sea change is by society supporting the political powers that be to make the changes that will then force these closed structures like a prison, military, paramilitary system that's, you know, still functioning like they did 150 years ago in some ways, with the uniforms and all the rest of it. But you know, that's one of the other things. Just as you were talking, that struck me. One other thing I just wanted to make. Emilie just given us a signal. I'll just make a quick comment. That you know, when you talked about the peer support, one of the advantages, I think, and this is something we focus on within 7-Step, because within our core groups, everybody is equal in terms of, as long as they're following the 7 steps to freedom and keeping their commitment. You know, people, you know, they can have had all kinds of horrendous mental health situations, and I can tell you within our lifers group in William Head, seen lots of that, of people that have had all sorts of issues in the past. But one of the things they can do within the group, because they trust that what goes on in the group is confidential, they feel safe, they can talk about it. It's almost like it becomes it's a healing place for sure. And it allows them then to interact with staff in the institution and with other inmates, and be able to apply some of, like what you said, where some people may have certain portions of their behavior that, you know, may not be acceptable in the broad sense, but they at least have a place where they can then, the right word is filter that. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but anyway, then have that strength to go forward and actually be, you know, trusted to not become totally out of control in a situation, even though they can, to a certain extent, not totally lose control within the group. But I've seen someone have scared the hell out of me, somewhat of a breakdown within the group, because I'm thinking, how are we going to manage this? Like this, we're not professionals, you know, like this is a self-help organization here. But just through comfort and closeness, you know, we got through that situation and went on. And but Pete mentioned something earlier about people that are giving something back. And there's actually a paper somebody did. A gal named Helen Collins was on a Winston Churchill traveling fellowship. She came over from the UK, and she was talking about desistance, which is a term they use, which is in a sense somebody who gives up the criminal lifestyle to become a law-abiding citizen. And she talked about how one of the prime drivers of that is making good by giving back. And Pete referred to that earlier as well. And that's one of the things I think that is so valuable in terms of, you know, the meaningful human contact. But and I guess that's one of the things that maybe this will, as I said earlier, you know, talking about with the COVID lockdowns and that people suddenly start to think about that, and maybe that will add some more humanity back into the thinking of managing an institution. Because as I said earlier, I don't know that they're going to go away shortly, but in any event, that's where I'm at, and I see the the hook is coming. So.
And the last thing, I'll give my last thought. When I think about meaningful human contact, I think about a friend of mine, Randy Riley, who recently had his conviction vacated. And as he left Atlantic Institution, he left everything there. And this is what the guys do, you know? So that kind of love where I'm like, oh, what happened to your stuff? He's like, oh yeah, I gave it all away. And then he's like, you know how you had those extra boxes because of COVID? He's like, this person's coming by your house. You know what I mean? They're going to pick it up and I'm going to send it back in for this person. So there's so much love and like work between people going on inside. And I think whenever we think about this, we're taught to imagine inside as this place, and it is a place of horror, but then we're also, you know, taught to imagine that there's no humanity there, that, you know, like nobody inside talks to each other about transforming their life. Nobody inside ever takes accountability for themselves and feels remorse and wants to change and wants to say they're sorry. You know, nobody inside ever helps each other. And that happens all the time. People are there, you know, like all the people that like, I gave up my phone call to this person because they have something to tell you. I gave my you know, I came in and this guy gave me his canteen because I didn't have any canteen for the week. So he's given me a couple of things. People that, you know, texting you on behalf, this guy doesn't have any calls, but he just wants you to know, you know, like there's all kinds of stuff, small and big, that people do for each other. You know, Randy was talking about leaving the prison and everyone cheering, you know, as he walked out, and just that celebration as he left, you know, and people, which happens all the time too, right? As people are leaving, people who celebrate that freedom. So that is what is meaningful. And I really ask people, you know, we always talk about the terrible things, but don't take the humanity out of there, and then imagine that therefore everybody that lives in a prison is never living there in a space of compassion, in a space of transformation, in a space of healing, in a space of love, in a space of care, because those things don't go away in there. And I think I just want us to hold that as my kind of final comment as well. And that's, you know, all I'll say. And this has been an amazing conversation. It could go on for like 4 hours more. And, you know, big ups to 7 Step as well for, you know, like what you guys are doing in terms of returning power into people who have the lived experience, and into people being inside, and returning that sense and emphasizing that all the time, that like, just because you've been inside does not mean you're a less person, does not mean that you can't do these things. And I think that's the most important thing. How we think about someone who's been a prisoner is what then everything comes from that. You know, everything comes from seeing people as lesser and not having this ability and not being able to change. And you guys change that. And I think that's the most important work. So thank you. And Idil knows how I feel about Idil and her brilliance and everything that she does. And Emilie, of course, Ephraim, you know, which was, you know, going abolitionist before it was cool, you know. So yeah, everyone here, I mean, if people are watching, you know, you don't even know the kind of just decades and decades and decades combined in this space of organizations and people who have done that care work, and like, that's so important. So yay, everyone. Okay, I'm stopping.
Just I'll jump in for my final thought. I guess for me, you know, you really hit it on the head there with, you know, empowerment, right? Like if we, for me, coming to Seven Step Society, it was twofold, right? So we have, you know, the peers, which it has the reverse effect. It's positive peer pressure, right? So it's all about creating that change, you know, accountability, responsibility. That's what we're about, right? The other pillar of Seven Step is our volunteers, which are people that, you know, are throughout the community. You know, here in Nova Scotia, we have a wide range. Ontario, well, right across the country, we have a wide range of volunteers. People that have worked in the system, see that it's broken, see that a lot of things don't work, and they come get involved with us, you know, and they volunteer their time. So what happens is now you're bringing both sides together, right? So it's not, you know, people just talking at you anymore. You know, that's the big part with the peers, because I get it, I understand, I know what you're going through because I've been there, right? Those types of things, and it's like, look, this is what I did to get through it. This is what she did to get through it. This is what he did, you know, and then the volunteer side of things opens the doors, and it changes the language, you know, of how people are speaking, you know, to you and to each other, right? So, you know, if you're sitting in segregation or in any prison, and all you talk about is crime, drugs, you know, all that kind of stuff, that's what you're learning. So that's one of the things that, you know, that I take away from Seven Step all the time is the language and the conversations and the connections in the community. And I tell guys that and women that all the time, that, you know, it's about making the connections, you know. And if, you know, Adele, you were talking about it earlier about, you know, people that are being picked to do the peer support, and I completely agree 110%. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way that it's looked at. You know, if the staff are majority white and stuff, that's who's being picked to do it, because there's that, you know, unconscious decision making going on, right? And it's, you know, they have a connection. Yeah, this is the guy. We're going to do that with him. You know, when we look at the peer support side of things, I think that it's, you know, it's very important to have a wide range, you know, of people that are not only taking the program, but also facilitating, right? Which in turn, you know, plants the seeds, because that's really what it's about. It's, for us, it's about planting those seeds, right? Getting it in there, putting it in there, and letting, hopefully, you know, watering it, letting it get sunlight, and it growing, right? And it's all about the love, you know. That's really what it's all about, that positive energy, bringing that to people, and allowing them to harness that and give it back again, right? So, you know, that's really what my final thoughts are on it. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was amazing. Al, it's great to have a chat with you. You know, I've seen you there. Your poem is absolutely amazing. What you did for Seven Step,
Thank you.
I was floored by it. Yeah, it was absolutely good. Adele, I've seen you somewhere before, or maybe I've just...
Maybe, I don't know, but now I want to hear the poem that Elle did for Seven Step. Just like, I haven't heard it.
Unbelievable.
I know Elle's poems, but I don't know this one. So Elle, if you want to share it, just saying, if we can wrap up maybe on that. I don't know.
No? Okay, because that would be great.
Or any poem, but because it's about Seven Step, I wouldn't mind hearing it.
I feel like I talked a lot. Does George want to? I don't know. Does anyone else have any final things?
Yeah, and Adil, if you have any final thoughts to share before Elle shares her poem, or...
No, I'm just really happy to have been a part of this conversation and to have like had a chance to connect with all of you. Yeah, I just really appreciated the conversation.
And I'll say one thing, Emily, and then I'll keep quiet. And that is, thank you for coordinating this. Thank you to everybody. Nice to meet you, Adele. Al and I have met before, either on video or in person. I think her poem was not just meaningful for Seven Step, it's meaningful for anyone. And I think if she's able to do it now, if she has it there, she's actually going to do us a great favor as well, not right this minute, obviously. She's going to record this, and it's going to be on our national website as well. So anyway, Elle.
Well, I'm actually going to stop talking too. So what I'm going to say is, Elle, when you finish your poem, you give me the nod, and I will end the recording at the end of your poem. So I feel tremendously grateful, lucky to have been a fly on the wall during your conversation, and I look forward to having a lot more with all of you. So thank you very much. And I'll just stop there.
Thanks for bringing us together. I think that's really important to say. Thanks for bringing all of us together and facilitating the conversation and taking this work seriously from very divergent perspectives. I think that's also really important. So I appreciate that.
And for the whole series, it's 15 days. People can go back and check them out. 15 days of solitary confinement. Check out the next conversations as well.
Thank you, Emily and George. It's really great seeing you both again.
All right, here it is. This is the poem for 7-Step. And what it does is it contains the steps in it. So you can go to the 7-Step website and see what those steps are in their language. I lifted them into this poem. There are lessons we've learned that we let ourselves forget. Before we could walk, first we crawled and we crept. Once we accepted we could move forward, that's when we leapt. And when we could hold ourselves up, then we reached a hand back to help. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. We don't have to see. Our belief will grant it. When we're down on our knees and don't think we can stand it in the dark, we feel we're alone and stranded. We've reached out before and come back empty-handed. And it seems like too much that the world has demanded. Our mistakes seem too deep and we feel like we're branded. But please understand, there are always second chances. Sometimes it feels like we can barely chase success. Some days we taste the failures that sit heavy on our chest, but when it seems like the stress makes it hard to take a breath, the pain that we feel, it can barely let us rest. Healing seems too far and we don't know what's next, but facing the truth about ourselves is the very first step. And maybe that truth can feel too frightening and ugly. We think if people saw the real me, no one would love me. To cover it up, maybe we've drunk and we've drugged, but we know the darkest things only grow when they're swept under the rug. And when we see that truth, we know we have to change, realizing there is a power from which strength is gained. And when we use that power, we start breaking our chains. The second step is taken and 5 more remain. It's a journey inside, not a journey of the feet. And being unafraid to see is how we reach step 3. Honesty of self is what we seek, examining our strengths and finding where we're weak. Finding our weakness is nothing to be ashamed because our weaknesses become strength once we give them a name. Through concentrating on our strength, we find the power to aid, and so we take the 4th step on the path we have laid. But let me say this, no journey is straight. Sometimes we find ourselves going backwards, or our courage might fade, or our purpose gets swayed by the guilt or the hate. We despair and we wonder if maybe it's too late. That's when we reach out for help to place us back on the way. Because we know we were meant for this flight and ascent. We decide that our freedom is worth more than what we resent, and we don't let negativity live in our heads without rent. In step 5, we continue unbowed and unbent. From a place we were broken, we make ourselves whole. You can call it will, mind, determination, spirit, or soul. Every day we set freedom as an attainable goal. In step 6, we have grown and we know we're in control. When we move to new things, there are stumbles and slips. Progress isn't easy, it never comes quick. And so many of our walls, it's us who put in some bricks. But we know we can survive when we're taking those hits. Because there's no freedom for one till there's freedom for all. And somewhere in the dark, there's someone else making that call. There's someone trying to stand who needs help not to fall. So in the 7th step, we reach back behind someone else's wall. There's walls made of metal and locks without keys. But in the mind and the heart is how we get free. And from the first step we took in faith before we could see, that journey bears fruit when our me turns to we. When we give to others, we find the strength to be. We won't always be strong. We won't always be wise. Sometimes we shut down with our true self disguised, but from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs, when we journey together, we know we all rise. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.